These are the text notes for Mark Twain's The Notorious Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. The story was printed multiple times in different magazines and newspapers. It first appeared in 1865 in a publication called the Saturday Press. And the title jumped kind of back and forth between the celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, the notorious Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. This was also a popular story that Twain liked to include on his lecture tales, or on his lecture tours, I'm sorry. And we know that, Samuel Clemens or Mark Twain had a very adventurous life. He was a riverboat pilot. He went out west, hopped a train and went out west to try his hand in mining for gold. And so a lot of these stories, like this one, are his kind of what would appeal to adventurous sorts of people, the people that he would meet in his mining camps, and stories that you tell around a campfire, kind of like these tall tales of the Old West, which were popular at the time. And one of the things that Twain really struggled with is because he lived such a poor childhood. He he his mother was a single mother from the time when he was very young, and so they struggled a lot. And so Twain really struggled with overcoming that in his later years as an author. And he wanted to he wanted to be he wanted to make a fortune. He wanted to make money, and he wanted to be treated with respect and dignity, and have that kind of that. He always kind of strove to be a writer like the ones from New York and Chicago and the Eastern, the bigger city writers with a more formal voice. And but he often, struggled with that identity in his lifetime. And so I think that plays a big role in his overall attitude and approach to writing. So this story is a tall tale, most likely inspired by his experiences at mining camps, where he would listen to the miners' stories. And it's not meant to be taken seriously. It's very far-fetched. It's a tall tale, characteristic of the true West, the Old West kind of a story. But, readers at first, they believe that they're about to sit down and listen to this true account, this true story. And they get drawn into this giant yarn of a story. But what makes it so great is that the protagonist of the story, readers can really relate to. Here you have this ordinary, everyday character, middle-class man, Jim Smiley. He's not very well educated. He definitely doesn't talk like he's well educated. He uses the local vernacular, the colloquial language. And he is flawed. He loves to gamble, and he will literally gamble on just about anything. And so readers can really identify, because he is an ordinary, everyday guy. He has a character flaw. He's flawed just like the rest of us. It's very real, and one of those characteristics of realism that we talked about. And Twain, on his part, he doesn't set him up to be made fun of or to be scorned at, and he doesn't pass any judgment himself. It's really just presenting this story for readers to recognize this character and recognize the story that he has to tell. And so he also uses a double narrator. So we have the persona that is Mark Twain's kind of fictional voice, who is not identified in the story, and he's kind of our frame narrator. He sets up the story that we're going to take, that's going to be told, that we're going to get. And then the inner narrator is a man named Simon Wheeler. And so you can tell the difference between Simon's narrative voice and this fictive voice of Twain's, where the frame narrator uses that educated diction, he uses higher language, and that inner narrator is going to use that uneducated vernacular, that colloquial language. And it's really that his use of humor and his satire and that colloquial language and those ordinary characters that help establish the realism in this story. So we start with an explanation of a narrator of the frame narrator of a letter that he had received, requesting that he go and visit try to hunt down a friend of a friend whose name was Reverend Leonidas Smiley. And so he comes across this guy, Simon Wheeler, and asks about Leonidas Smiley, as he was requested to do. And the narrator is like, I don't even know about this guy, but I can tell you about Jim Smiley, who is, and kind of he backs him into a corner, it says, and he backs him into a corner and starts telling this long, drawn-out story about this character named Jim Smiley, this famous guy in town who loved to gamble, and there wasn't anything that he would not bet on. And so it's kind of divided into three parts. The first part is an introduction to our Smiley, who is a lucky, uncommon lucky man who most always comes out a winner. Simon Wheeler says. And in each section of the story is an animal that Simon Wheeler has raised up that he bets on routinely. The first animal is the mare, and this mare is she's an old lady, old nag. She has asthma. She's slow. But she won every single race that she was entered into. And Simon always, Jim Smiley always bet on her to win. They would give her, it says, a 200 or 300 yard start and then pass her underway. But at the end of the race, she'd get excited and come cavorting and straddling up and scattering her legs around limber, sometimes in the air and sometimes out to one side among the fences and kicking up MORE dust and raising MORE racket with her coughing and sneezing and blowing her nose. And she would win every single race that she entered into. And he attributed that to her failure to give in, her failure to give up. The second part of the story is about his bull pup, whose name was Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson was a fighting dog, a fighting bull pup. And to look at him, he wasn't worth a cent. He wouldn't think he was. He didn't have any back legs, and he won every fight he was in because he would grab on to the back legs of a dog that he was in a fight with and just hang on until they threw in the towel. And that was his method of winning. And he won every single one until the day he came up against a dog that had no back legs and he couldn't win against him. So he just gave up and died. And then the final part of the story is about Daniel Webster. And Daniel Webster is his jumping frog, his Smiley's jumping frog, and he educated him. It says he catched a frog one day and took him home and said he calculated to educate him. And so he never done nothing for 3 months but sat in his backyard and learned that frog to jump. And you bet you he did learn him too. He'd give him a little punch behind, and the next minute you'd see that frog whirling in the air like a donut, see him turn one somerset or maybe a couple if he got a good start, and come down flat-footed and all right like a cat. And he would enter him into jumping contests against every frog in town. And Jim, of course, would bet on it that he had the frog that could outjump every frog in Calaveras County. And so one day a stranger comes to town and he decides to take Jim up on his bet. Well, he didn't have a frog, so Jim, good-natured Jim, volunteers to go and get him a frog and brings back he's going to go and get him a frog that he can enter the race with. Well, the stranger's smart, he's cunning, and he sees an opportunity to win, and he fills Daniel Webster full of quail shot, which are little tiny BBs, and he fills them up all the way to under his neck with this quail shot. And so when he's done with him, Daniel Webster can't even move, much less jump. And so Jim Smiley comes back with this frog, and he's ready to enter this contest, and he puts the little common frog, the uneducated frog, up against Daniel Webster, who he had educated and trained to jump and win. And of course, the common frog, the one that's not trained to jump, out jumps Daniel Webster because Daniel Webster can't jump. He's so full of the quail shot. Well,
teachers and students, at this time you should be reporting directly to...
So Smiley realizes that he's been had, and he takes off after the stranger, but he is unable to catch him. And you would think that with this latest failure that he would learn his lesson, and he would not bet on anything ever again. But nope, he sets off and looks for another animal that he can train to win races. And so here we have just an entertaining story. It doesn't seem to really have a moral or a point, but it's really layered in his use of in Twain's use of humor and his satire. So it seems like first of all, the fact that he used Andrew Jackson, who was like the 6th president of the United States, that was a good president by all accounts, and kind of a fair president, and Daniel Webster, who was a lawyer during the time period. It's kind of poking fun at the political situation that was happening during the time. But also, this whole idea, he knew that this story would resonate with these Old West miners and their lack of, I guess, a formal education compared to the East highly educated city folk here. That you don't necessarily have to be educated and well-spoken to be clever. You know, Jim Smiley was uneducated, but he was clever, he was smart, he was cunning, and he was lucky, and he always, won a bet. He rarely lost. And but you also, a good education doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get fooled. Like Daniel Webster, who was trained to be the best jumper, the best frog in Calaveras County. It wasn't a defense against getting fooled like he was by the stranger in the quail shot. So, kind of satire, poking fun at the educated and the uneducated kind of ideas of the West and the East. And an interesting story, a funny story. It's always been one of my favorite stories by Mark Twain.